prayer and pledge will be led by our Vice Mayor, Chris Bratcher. Mr. Bratcher.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask everyone, please bow with me for a moment of silence, please. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council, July 9th, 2009. And befitting the fact that Uncle Dave Macon Days are coming up this weekend, I've brought a gavel made by of cedar from Uncle Dave Macon's farm and presented to my dad, who was chairman of the Tennessee General Assembly's House Finance Committee in 1973 and 74. And this was made by Mr. Henry Herman Waddell, and it comes from the farm of Uncle Dave Macon. So I'll be using this tonight, gentlemen, and be very careful.
Oh, my.
I know, and I've been trying to do some push-ups so I can hold on to it. It's pretty big compared to my regular gavel. So
Looks more like a croquet mounting.
well, with a longer handle, it probably could be. But
Is it good luck for a mayor to have more than one gavel?
well, it's if I break one, then it's always got a backup. That's a good thing. So
good.
I'll try not to use that except in the correct times. Also, we have an honored guest with us tonight, soon to be a Rutherford County missionary to Boston and all of Massachusetts. And that is Alex Thurman. Alex is getting ready to leave our fair community tomorrow morning with his family and venture to the Badlands of Massachusetts. And as we have had, Alex, so many people from up there come down here, first of all in that great war of northern aggression, and then since that time, because they like our climate and our jobs, we are very pleased to have you going up there and returning the favor to them. And we know you will have a great time up there, and we wish you well and your family. And we hope to see you soon to come back and see your grandma, Georgia Machoto, who sits right here in front of us. So have a great trip, and we will miss you, okay? We love our missionaries. All right. You have before you your consent agenda. Do you have any questions regarding any of the items on your consent agenda? And you might note that we did have a revised agenda which added item F, which is recommendations of the Parks and Recreation Director with regards to Youth Flag Football League fees. If you have any questions on any of the items on the consent agenda, we'll entertain those at this time.
Mayor, seeing none, I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, you have before you the minutes of the meeting held on June the 8th, 2009. If you've had an opportunity to review those, are there any changes, additions, or deletions to those minutes? And if not, is there a motion that we accept those minutes as they are presented?
Move to be approved. Second.
All right, a motion and second. Please call the roll. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to annex an area located along Veterans Parkway and Franklin Road.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to zone an area located along Veterans Parkway and Franklin Road to a planned commercial development PCD district simultaneous with annexation.
Move for its passage on third and final reading.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gillen.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for adoption a resolution to prohibit handguns in municipal parks, natural areas, historic parks, nature trails, campgrounds, forests, greenways, waterways, ball fields, golf courses, sports complexes, community recreation centers, and other similar public places. Mr. Lyons?
Sure. Just a few brief comments, Mayor, members of council. As you know, the city currently bans handguns in our city parks. That has been in effect for a very long time. In this past General Assembly session, the General Assembly approved a law which allowed handgun carry permit individuals to bring guns into parks. But if a city had a ban previously, they would have to adopt a resolution to opt out of that. This was an item that was on your agenda in mid-June. Following that meeting, you asked for some additional information about the impact relative to TSSAA. We did include some information in your packet about TSSAA's position on that. After the packet was prepared, TSSAA had refined its position and clarified it somewhat, so we've provided that information to you this evening. Additionally, what we wanted to do was to share with you some information about what has happened in other Tennessee communities. We did a review of newspapers, emails, and some listservs from local governments in Parks and Recreation, and we've compiled a list of 46 cities and counties that have been known to opt out already or in the process of opting out. Wanted to share that information with you. Be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
All right. Any questions?
Mayor, I do have a few comments that I would like to make on this.
Gillen.
First, I would like to thank everyone in the community who has provided input to, I think, every one of us on the council about this issue. A lot of times we have things that come before us that we often are wondering what the public really thinks or feels, and this has not been one of those issues where we've had to wonder, regardless of which side the public has been on for each individual who's voiced their concerns. I think it's been a well-voiced opinion on both sides of this issue. It's been a very emotionally charged issue, I think, for our community and for we on the council to have thought about and dwelt upon for the last couple of weeks since we met. And I've done a lot of thinking. You know, there are a lot of folks who have called and emailed who feel that there should be just complete free reign on those of us with carry permits. Others are quick to point out that all of our constitutional freedoms in some way, shape, or fashion have parameters or limitations on them, if you will. And in fact, the carry permit law itself, to me, is exactly one of those limitations. In other words, you've got to have the carry permit and it passed the testing and the background checks to be able to carry that arm. But I've tried to look at both sides of things, and some points I would like to make. Years ago, when the original carry permit law was passed and was being discussed in the state legislature, there was talk everywhere across the state that it's going to turn into the Wild West. You're going to see folks walking everywhere with sidearms strapped on their belts as they go through town. That really has not happened. The vast majority of us sit next to individuals in restaurants, in church, in events who may or may not be utilizing their privileges under their carry permit, and we have no idea of that. And as far as that goes, there are a number of other states now that we have reciprocal agreements with regarding carry permits. They're allowed now in federal and state parks, and the percentage of the population that you're actually talking about it applying to is probably fairly low. I believe, and I may be wrong, Rob, but I think it's less than 5% of the state's population that have carry permits. Am I correct?
I'm not researching
in that. But if that's the case, if you say it's 5% in the state of Tennessee, and then lower that number down to those who utilize the parks and recreational facilities, and then lower that down even further to those who have the permit but then choose not to carry it all the time, you're probably getting down to a fairly small number of individuals amongst our population that would actually utilize that right and privilege to carry the weapon. Other things I think there are to think about is there are arguments to be made that crime is actually higher in gun-free zone states. You look at the other side of the coin, and folks who have not grown up around guns, especially handguns, their concern is for fear and safety of children and others in their midst, fear of what happens if it's things such as ball games where tempers can sometimes flare over a child being called out when his dad is completely positive that he's safe on third. And those are all things that I think we have to consider. In the line of work that I do, I often feel that probably 95% of the time there's a compromise on everything. Now, there are those issues in life where there is no compromise to be had just as a matter of principle for certain individuals. Perhaps this is one of those issues. But I think that it doesn't necessarily come down to the extreme positions of either side in this situation. For one to say, is Murfreesboro so unsafe that people feel the need that they've got to be able to carry a gun in a park or on a ball field? I don't think that that's necessarily the case of the carry permit holders. When people say that it's safe to walk on the Greenway, by and large, I think that it is. But there are secluded areas of the Greenway, and I bet if I ask a majority of the women in the audience, if they walk on the Greenway, if they carry pepper spray with them. I know pepper spray is not a gun, but at the same time, the reason that's being carried is a self-defense measure. And those of us who are carry permit holders feel the same way about our ability to be able to carry a weapon in those areas. Representative Carr's comments in the newspaper today about what the state law's original intent was because of rural areas and more wilderness areas. Well, there are certainly areas of our greenway and our walking trails that are in more secluded areas or closer to rural areas. In addition to the potential of assaults and so forth, police can't be everywhere at all times. There are issues of snakes, skunks, animals, and that sort of thing. I have talked about earlier in the week the potential of a compromise, and I'll ask if that potential lies the way that the state law is written, and that is to ban it at certain events or in certain areas, but not all parks. And some have commented that that's perhaps would result in a convoluted law that would be hard to enforce and people to understand. But not really. When you think about it, under the new current state law, you're now allowed to carry into a restaurant that serves alcohol, but you can't drink alcohol while you're carrying your firearm in there. It gets down to even there are things laws that affect our everyday lives where there are do's and don'ts that we have to be aware of. There are red lights you can turn right on red and others you can't. There are certain holidays that for whatever historic reasons that liquor stores can't sell, but other holidays they can. And so I think if there's a compromise to be had, it can be worked out without it being a quote-unquote convoluted way of doing things. But the end result, I think, is that there is not a blanket ban that is necessary. So my proposal is one of two alternatives, and that is that at competitive sporting events, which including Little League, Spring Fling, things like that, which has been the vast majority of the emails I've gotten of the type of things that people seem to be concerned about, if the ban can be posted at those events, or in the alternative, we come up with a list of areas where those events are typically held, the ball fields, Sportscom, Patterson Park, because of locker potential thefts and so forth, to allow the ban there, but to allow the permit to be utilized on walking trails and the Greenway. If the current state law doesn't allow for that, then I would ask that our legislature next year revisit the law so that perhaps the municipalities have that latitude. And if that type of compromise can't be worked out, I will go on record as saying that based on my own personal beliefs and convictions, I will not vote for any ban on the carry permit.
Any other comments?
Mayor, I'd like to, if we could get Ms. McGannon maybe to give us her legal opinion on what she believes would be those concerns that Mr. Gilley had just voiced. What is your thoughts on that, Ms. McGannon?
Mr. Bradshaw, I do not believe the state law as currently written would allow an event-specific ban. It is written to deal with locations. There's no provision for events. There's nothing comparable to the provision for weapons in bars, but not when drinking. And I do not believe that it could be implied to be activity-specific. So as to the first thing, based on what's happening at the place, I don't think that provision is present. And based on not just this session's amendment, but the law which it was amending and the other laws that deal with the owners of places are allowed to say that the place cannot have weapons. There just isn't something comparable to the drinking ban. As to the list of areas, walking trails and greenways, for example, the state law that passed this session is very specific. If a legislative body elects to prohibit the possession of handguns within a park, the prohibition shall apply to the entire park. So I don't think that we could divide the greenway and say segments of the greenway from here to here, but not the part of the greenway that's in Old Fort Park, for example. I don't believe that division is there. Now, it is certainly possible that one could say weapons allowed in Old Fort Park, weapons not allowed in Barfield Crescent, or the reverse. But it would be the entire park based on the law as it currently stands.
In a follow-up question to that, Ms. McGannon, if the ban is opted in to allow the ban, can it be amended at a later date to list specific areas where the ban is in place versus, or does that need to be dealt with on the front end?
That's a little unclear. Certainly, if opting out does not occur, the areas where the new law allows it would allow it. I think there's no explicit prohibition for a subsequent change. In other words, if the council decided at this time that they were not going to opt out, that they were going to allow weapons in all of the public parks, greenways, natural areas, or similar public places, there isn't anything that explicitly prohibits the council from changing its mind at a later date. But equally, there's nothing that specifically authorizes that. The fact that the language says that the municipality may prohibit by resolution these things and has the effective date, I think it would be most prudent, if the council feels there's any doubt about this, to opt out now, seek clarification from either the legislature or the Attorney General about whether or not it had the ability to change its opt-out decision at a later date. Again, it's not explicitly prohibited, but the effective date being delayed to September 1st for the opting out thing seems to be designed to allow a window for the opt-out decision to be made. And I think it could be implied, based on what I've been told about the legislative history, that it was intended that it be exercised during that period or not at all. But that legislative history was quite extensive, and I have not sought the transcripts of all of those debates to be able to say authoritatively one way or another. Certainly, I think the consensus is that if you were going to opt out, it should be before September 1st. But I can't say that I believe that is a clear legal requirement.
And the reason for my question is this, is because the way that I understand things is you have to opt out. In other words, if we take no affirmative action, then our ban is lifted as of September 1st under the new state law.
That's correct.
So if my position is that I don't want it to be banned, a blanket ban, so to speak, I guess what I'm getting at is any motion that's made is, in effect, a motion to enforce the ban in some way, either partial or its in entirety.
Right. I think I took your concern to be, could there later be a piecemeal ban after September 1st? And my answer is, I think so, but it's not clear.
But between now and September 1st, and the point that I'm making is this, is because I'm fine with the ban being lifted in its entirety. So that doesn't leave me in a position to want to say, I want to have a partial ban, but I'm willing to have a partial ban if the rest of the council is desiring to lift the ban, if I'm making my point clear.
And the two examples of a partial ban that you gave, an activity base or part of a park, I'm suggesting I don't believe are allowed. And so my recommendation would be, in order to preserve a partial ban, if that's what the council wishes to do, it should do the total opt-out now and seek clarification whether the alternatives that you said might be acceptable compromise to you were feasible. That needs clarification from a more authoritative source than I am, that the Attorney General or the legislature should be asked for an opinion about those compromises, because I believe there is reason to fear that if the council adopted that compromise now, that might be an ineffective opt-out, and the council might lose the ability to opt out at all. I'm saying that I hope I am wrong. I hope that there would be the more flexibility after September 1st, but I can't tell the council that it is clear that that flexibility would be maintained.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, our options tonight, in the clearest sense of what you would recommend that we do, is either the one would be to take no action, and come September 1, our ban is lifted. The other option is, if the council passes the ban and I wish to remove the ban, or suggest that we remove the ban off of certain defined parks or areas, that would be brought up at a time after the city has opted out.
Well, the two examples you gave weren't
Well, I understand.
entire parks. The
Right.
law is clear that the council could do an entire park.
Okay, and that's what I'm getting, and I appreciate, and I will take your legal advice on that those first two, but what I'm getting at, the potential option that we have for the partial ban, i.e. specific parks, if that's the route that I'm wishing to suggest to the council, then that would come after, if this council has adopted the opt-out provision.
I think the council could do entire parks at any time before September 1st. And it would be clearly lawful. What is less clear that it would be lawful is if it made if it delayed past September 1st and wished to opt out as regards certain parks, or what you had mentioned, the greenway system. Since the greenway system is integrally involved with several of our parks, I don't know how we could do that. And that's what I'm saying. I think it would be better if we got some clarification, and I think it would need to be legislatively rather than the Attorney General.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions regarding this proposed resolution?
Mayor, I have lost count, over 200 email and phone calls that I've received, and had a phone call from the LA Times, I don't know, one day last week, and I was walking around in a parking lot talking on the phone, and the question they asked me, they said, do you feel that you were burdened by the legislature sending this down? And I said, well, I really don't feel burdened, but what I do feel, the one thing that I've enjoyed about serving on city council is that it's really not conservative issues or liberal issues or Republican or independent or Democrat issues. It's community issues. And I felt like that's the thing that I've not enjoyed about this, that it's put the council in the crossfire of, the quote she uses, partisan politics, which, if you talk to the people of the legislature, there were different reasons that this bill came forward. I still try to look at it as a community issue, and I think it's one of a common sense issue. Try to approach every issue as a common sense issue. I was sitting 2 weekends ago with my 70-year-old granddad, and my granddad's an NRA card-carrying, funny bumper sticker on the back of his car, guy. And I said, Granddad, what do you think? And he said, I don't see why you need guns in parks. And so I've tried to get counsel, and I think that there are fine individuals who are carry permit, people. I consider Councilman Gilly a fine individual. And I think just as we have fine individuals, there are some people who probably shouldn't be having a carry permit, even though all the licensings and things that they go through. Just like I think that we have laws for many different things, and unfortunately we have a law against drinking and driving, but someone will drive drunk tonight. We try to do everything that we can to stop that, but that doesn't mean that we always will stop it. But what I've tried to look at from a parks perspective, and as someone who serves on the Parks and Recreation Commission, I understand Councilman Gilly's proposal that or compromise that we're talking about, but I think there are some confusing things that we have to deal with when we say that we're going to allow them in certain spots and not allow them in these other spots. You look at Patterson Park. That was designed, as Mr. Goodwin has told us, that was designed with a campus concept. We have a elementary school, we have a high school, and then we have Patterson Park there together. They share parking lots. So there's still going to be a law saying that you can't have guns on schools and on school property. But yet at one of our parks, we have school property in one of our parks. So do we say at that park, well, you can have it inside this park, but you can't have it in the parking lot? Well, how do you get to the community center, but yet to park in the parking lot? So there's, for instance, at the Greenway, or we have Old Fort Park, and we're going to say, well, you can't have it at Old Fort Park, but you can have it on the Greenway. But if you're going to go to the Greenway, you can't park in the parking lot at Old Fort Park because that's part of the park. So we're going to have to cut out part of the park to make sure that you can carry your firearm. We've got a list of different things that we have. And I'm not saying that our residents are not very smart people, because we have a great resident base. But to understand where and where not we can't carry, that would be tough. And I think not only would it be tough on staff, it would be tough on our police officers to enforce, just like we try to enforce county and city lines all the time on what's county, what's city. So, from a Parks and Recreation standpoint, I don't see, we've not had an outcry since I've been sitting on council for a lift of firearms in parks. At least from Parks and Recreation, from sitting on the commission, I've not seen outside groups saying we want to have firearms on there. So, that's not to say that I use the Greenway probably just as much as anyone on this council. I run the Greenway early in the morning, and I could go run the Greenway tomorrow and get clubbed clubbed in the morning, get clubbed in the head. Now, if I had a gun, would it make a difference? I don't know. But there's not been a time yet that I've been on the Greenway that I felt completely unsafe. Now, if we get to that point, would I be willing to address that? Absolutely. But from a Parks and Recreation standpoint right now, I think that I would be fine keeping it like it is, just like the other 46 or 48 cities, including Metro Davidson, Nashville, Hamilton County, City of Chattanooga, Shelbyville, Williamson County, Brentwood. Most of the communities that are surrounding us have voted to opt out of that. So.
Any other comments or questions regarding this resolution? And certainly I've had a number of emails and phone calls, and I do appreciate every one of them. I think all of them, obviously, for whatever reason, either agree or disagree. Councilman Gilly, you've brought up some good questions, and I appreciate that discussion and getting some clarification from Ms. McGannon, who always is very smart, I think, in keeping us on point, and so I appreciate that back and forth. It's just hard to imagine that this council wouldn't provide more police enforcement, that we wouldn't provide more security in any area that we have as a city or any of our public areas if we had some problem or difficulty. And I would be remiss as mayor if I didn't insist to our police chief that he do his job and that he protect all of our citizens as much as possible. And I believe he has done this. I believe our Parks and Recreation people do very well in managing the crowds that we have, the gatherings that we have for events. I think our nature trails, our parks, our natural areas, our greenways, our ball fields are safe. I certainly don't think even really that people would come to a park to do harm. Generally speaking, most of us go to the park with a picnic basket or with go to the golf course with a set of golf clubs or something like that. We just don't take valuables and things like that. So from that opportunistic point of view, it just doesn't seem to be an area where people would go if they felt like they needed to carry a firearm with them. So my position would be to opt out of this law. I believe our parks are safe. I want them to be safe, and as long as I'm mayor, I'll work very hard and diligently to ensure that our city staff, our emergency services workers maintain the safety that we have in our parks.
Mayor, I want to make a couple of comments, and I really don't want to reiterate what's already been said, but I agree with what Councilman McFarland and Mayor, you have said. I know this has been a very, very volatile and controversial issue. I quit counting my emails at 200, and it seemed to me like it went way past that, and not to mention the phone calls that we've had. And I understand that that it's a very, for those who carry handguns, it's a very passionate thing, and and they feel like it's a right, and it is. And I know guns are probably only as dangerous as those individuals who are carrying them. But I think that, what we've had in the past, it hasn't, if we've had problems, I serve on the Parks and Recreation Commission with Councilman McFarland, and, we haven't had an outcry of people to come to us saying, we need guns in our parks. So as far as I know, they've been safe. They've been a great place for our family and our children to enjoy themselves. And if it's not broke, I don't think we need to fix it at this point. So I would also lean toward the opt-out until, if something happened, like you said, Mayor, in the future that caused us to see a problem, then we can look at it at that point. But at this point, I don't see a need to do it today. So I would also vote to opt out at this point.
Any other comments or questions, or is there a motion?
Mayor, is there any more comments? Mayor, I'll give someone else a chance, and I'll be glad to make a motion, but make it. Mayor, I move that the City of Murfreesboro opt out on this issue.
So you have a motion to adopt the resolution, and we have a second.
Yes, sir.
Any questions on the resolution that's before you? Any other comments? Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
No.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Then we have opted out, and we do continue the prohibition against handguns in our municipal parks, natural areas, historic parks, nature trails, campgrounds, forests, greenways, waterways, ball fields, golf courses, sports complexes, community recreation centers, and other similar public places. I do appreciate council's concerns and consideration of this issue. I'm certain the General Assembly felt they were acting in the best interests of our citizens. I appreciate the carry permit holders who have gone through the process, and obviously I think that's an excellent way to identify persons who may, in fact, need to carry handguns. So I do appreciate all of those who have participated in this debate. I'm sure it will continue and go on probably long after tonight's meeting. Any other questions or comments? If not, then we'll consider recommendations of the city manager with regards to the termination of a special assessment agreement regarding the extension of Hazelwood Street. Mr. Lyons?
Yes, sir. Mayor, members of council, in the late 1990s, the city adopted a plan to extend Hazelwood Drive from New Lascassas Pike across Old Lascassas Pike and onto North Rutherford Boulevard. The portion from New Lascassas Pike to Old Lascassas Pike was constructed, but the road never did continue to Rutherford Boulevard. We have a drawing included in your packet if that helps you visualize it. However, due to changes in development along North Rutherford, the segment from Old Lascassas Pike to North Rutherford was deleted from the major thoroughfare plan. The affected property owners between New Lascassas and Old Lascassas donated right-of-way for Hazelwood Drive extension and agreed to pay an assessment of $100 per linear foot of curb adjacent to their properties toward the construction costs. The agreements were included in the warranty deeds, which was how the right-of-way was conveyed to the city. Because of the loss of connectivity by the deletion of the segment from Old Lascassas Pike onto North Rutherford Boulevard, these property owners are asking to be relieved of the assessment obligation. We have included in your packet a letter from Kathy Nobles. After a review of the situation, it is recommended that the city rescind the assessment agreements and the legal department prepare appropriate releases for execution by the mayor and recording. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Mr. Lyons on this recommendation?
Mayor, I move that you approve the recommendations of our soon-to-be city manager.
All right.
Second.
Motion and a second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider recommendations of the deputy city manager with regards to the alternative pension plan. Mr. Lyons.
Mayor, I went back and looked in my file, and we have been looking and studying an alternative pension plan for over 2 years now. We actually had our first meeting on this in April of 2007. As you're well familiar, through the series of workshops, pension committee meetings, the subcommittee that was established, and meetings that we've had with department heads and city employees, we have looked at this item in great detail. City Council had conducted a workshop in December. Following that workshop, we, as staff, met with each of you individually. And in the course of our individual meetings with you, you asked us to meet with our existing city employees to see what other questions they might have. As you know, the existing employees would remain in the city's defined benefit plan, but the proposed alternative pension plan would only apply to employees hired after July 1, 2010. We wanted to report back to you the results of the meetings that we had with our city employees. First meeting was scheduled over at Patterson Community Center. We did not have a single employee show up to that. We did have a follow-up meeting, a second meeting scheduled here at City Hall. We had a very small number of employees who did attend. There were no major substantive issues raised. That meeting took about 15 minutes. I would also mention that in making sure that all of our city employees understood what the proposal was for the alternative pension plan, we did provide to them frequently asked questions that went into great detail about the pension plan that would be for the new employees. So I think we did a lot of homework with our employees to make sure that they understood what the proposed plan was and, more importantly, what it was not. And what we wanted to do was report back to you the results of the employee meetings and to, again, recommend to you the adoption of the alternative pension plan. What I've laid out for you in the letter is kind of a step-by-step process if you are of a mind to adopt the alternative pension plan. But as you'll recall from the various meetings that we've had, we've really looked long and hard at this. We see this as an opportunity for our new employees to still enjoy a very good retirement program, but it is one that we feel like for the long-term financial sense for the city, that this is the right step to make. This is a recommendation that was made to you by the Pension Committee in October of 2008. So wanted to give you that brief update after our meetings with the employees and get some direction from you.
Any questions? Obviously, if we have been studying this for some considerable amount of time, and I think there was some concern early, some questions raised, and then we were, I think, generally in agreement that we go out to our current employees, none of which would be covered by our alternative plan, but at least to see if there were any questions raised through our current employee base, and we have done that. And now you have this recommendation to work with the pension committee to implement the decisions that we've outlined in this recommendation. Are there any questions of Mr. Lyons regarding that?
Mayor, if I have a question, if I could, I serve on that pension committee. I know that our total exposure, if it's a 3% from the city with a 3% match from the employee, with an additional option anywhere from 1 to 5% from the employee, and with that same match from the city. Is that correct? So
Yes,
it's
sir.
So it's a potential 8 and 8.
Yes, a minimum of 6% for each employee, 3%
Right.
being contributed by the employee, 3% from the city. The employee would voluntarily be able to put 1 to 5% of their pay into this plan, and the city would match that in its entirety. So if the employee put in 2%, the city would match an additional 2%.
It could be up to 16. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Are there other, I know this is a situation that a lot of, and we tend to, like tonight, look at what other cities do. Is there any trend, or is there any other cities that are looking at going away from the plan like we're in now, going to this type plan that we're looking at?
I know in the private sector it has definitely been that case. You're going to more often find a defined contribution plan on the private sector than in the public sector. I think as we've looked at this issue, we're probably one of the leaders in this area, but we're not the only one that's heading toward a defined contribution plan. I think as budgets have become tight, this has been one area where cities have looked to see, is there a way to still provide an excellent benefit for their employee, but in some way manage their exposure a little bit. As you will recall, we're currently contributing 11.89% of pay into the city's pension plan. And we know that the 3% that will match for existing employees will be the minimum. We know we'll have to do some additional match, but at least the city's contribution toward the defined contribution plan will be known. Additionally, unlike the existing defined benefit plan, we will not have that unfunded liability that we're needing to pay off over the next 33 years. So it is a little bit of a cost containment issue, but I think the pension committee worked hard at a structure that would still provide the employees with a very sound retirement.
So we're looking at somewhere as a savings 4 to 8% to the city. Is that close?
Well, over the first, it'll accumulate over time. Obviously, in the first year or two, we're substantially all of our employees are going to be under the existing plan.
Sure, it's going to be a number of years.
And it will
exactly.
grow.
Yeah.
The Michael Guyton, our consultant, I think projected about $3 million worth of accumulated savings in the first 10 years, and that will continue to increase as we go down the road. Eventually, all of the city employees will be on that defined contribution plan, but that will certainly take some
That
time.
would take quite a number of years.
This is a matter that does not draw the kind of comment from the public that other issues that we have just finished withdraw, but it is, in my opinion, at the core issue of what our city needs to do to be sound in the decades to come.
It's a taxpayer issue.
Yes, sir.
He's right.
Yeah. Mr. Lyons is wholly accurate when he says this is what private industry is moving toward. The city of Murfreesboro competes in the marketplace alongside of the largest employers in our community, and I know of no employer, large or small, today that still has a classic pension-type program. So as we compete for in the labor pool, this is the same thing that prospective employees are considering. So it's just a good practice as we are stewards over the public's funds to make this move. And if it's appropriate, I'm prepared to make such a motion, Mayor.
All right.
Let me make it.
All right, Mr. Pratchett.
As we go forward with this program, and we probably will make these changes if we do, I think we have some responsibility, if we would, as we hire these new employees that go underneath this program, to educate them on the benefits of what, not only just putting in the minimum 3%, but if they would encourage them to actually show them this may be, if that employee worked here 25 or 30 years and they contributed 16%, what that would mean to them on a modest return of investment. I think they may see that this plan could be, possibly has the benefit of being a better plan, but I think it's going to take some education on our part to guide our employees, because they're going to have to choose how they invest their money and what funds to invest it in. So it's going to take some guidance, because a lot of people don't have that expertise, and that's where the city's plan was really. I think I like the beauty of the city's plan. We took the money that the city was contributing. We hired professional money managers to invest that money at what we felt like was the best and the highest rate of return that we could get for our pension plan and for our employees. So that will be a change on that side, and I hope we do some things, whoever we choose to do our money management for our employees, that we would also have some education in there for them as well.
That's a great point, Mr. Bratcher. I think when we go through the process of trying to select a firm to manage this program for us, one of the things that we will, I'm sure, quiz them on a great deal is tell us how you're going to communicate with our employees. Tell us how you're going to communicate with the employees who may not be sophisticated investors. How can our employees understand this? What are you going to do to help them make good decisions? So that will be something in the selection process that I think will be very high on the list of criteria, and they're going to have to demonstrate to us that they've been successful elsewhere in doing that. So your point's very well taken, and will definitely be one of the things that we'll work
I just don't
hard
want
at.
us to, some future council someday look up, and a lot of our employees, especially those who may not be making as much as others, look at only a 6% investment, and all of a sudden they've reached retirement and they have it for whatever reason. It's not there for them. So anyway.
And, I think that this issue, if we were probably in mid-2000, or the late 90s or 2004, when the stock market was at a high, this wouldn't be much of an issue right now. But I think what I hear from our employees that, we're not there right now where we were 10 years ago. But, nonetheless, I think if you read the headlines of most all of our major newspapers, the one thing you read right now is legacy costs. And, I think that we do have a responsibility to the taxpayers. But at the same time, I still think that we will provide and continue to provide a very good benefit package to attract good employees.
Well, the second page of the Deputy City Manager's recommendation outlines the next steps, and those would be the ones that we would be accepting if we pass a motion to accept this recommendation. I did hear the mention of a motion. I don't know that it got made, but...
It did not.
All right. If there are other questions, those would be the steps that we would be authorizing city staff to take at this point.
Mayor, I make a motion that we accept the Deputy City Manager's recommendations on the alternative pension plan.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Is there any other questions on this motion? Other comments? If not, Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
No.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Thank you. At this time, we'll consider any beer permit applications. Ms. Wright.
We have 3 tonight, Mayor. There's a special event being held by MTSU at 1124 Rucker Lane. They have met our requirements for that permit. There's a special event being held by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation at 2250 Northwest Broad Street, which is the Harley-Davidson dealership. They have met our requirements for that application. And then we have a change of ownership for a convenience store at 2152 North Thompson Lane. And they lack their final building and codes inspections, which, once those are final, we would like to go ahead and issue their permit. That should be very soon.
All right, then they meet the...
They meet the requirements other than their final building and codes inspection.
All right. Is there a motion, then, we accept these applications subject to meeting the final on this one?
So moved.
Second.
All right, you have a motion, second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time you have before you a revised list of the statements to be considered for payment. If there are any questions on that list, now's a good time, and if there are no questions, I'll accept a motion that we pay the bills.
Pay the bills.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time we'll consider any other business from staff or the council to come before the council. Ms. McCannon.
Mayor Bragg, ask the council to approve a revision of Form 4007A, payment agreement in the employee handbook. The revision is required to reflect the change that is made July 1st of each year in terms of the weekly benefit rate under the workers' compensation law. It's going up $10 from $827 to $837. And a copy of the form showing those substituted figures is before you as a matter of other business.
All right. Is there a question regarding this recommendation?
No questions, Mayor. I move we approve the recommendation.
Second.
All right. Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. I have received a letter from Roger G. Haley, our city manager, who says effective upon his retirement, he will be stepping down from the city's pension committee, and I would recommend that we appoint at that time our new city manager, Rob Lyons, to the pension committee. That's my recommendation to you.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Any other business? Then at this time, make sure that you attend the Uncle Dave Macon Day
Yeehaw.
at Historic Cannonsburg. Starts tomorrow afternoon at 5, Saturday morning at 9, Sunday at 2 p.m. It's free.
What does it cost?
It's free.
It's free food.
It's free, and there will be free and paid parking available. But it's free to go to Uncle Dave Macon Days. Vice Mayor.
I would like to just, I know we have Lanny Goodwin, our Parks and Recreation Director. They've done a great job on the 4th of July events and all the activities, so I want to tell him, give him a pat on the back. He's done a great job.
When you can get fireworks and rain both, when you need a both of them, without a charge, it's really well done. Nicely done. Thank you. You're adjourned.